There is a quorum present, so I will call this meeting of the Plan Commission of March 25th, 2024 to order. First, we will get some information from our technical facilitator. Jesse?
All right, welcome to our virtual Plan Commission meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff, members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak or ask questions. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which their hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After all registrants speak, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesse. First, communications, disclosures, and recusals. Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Are there any disclosures or recusals? Seeing none. Next are Plan Commission public comments under agenda item 1. And I believe there are not any, but I will look to Kevin. Is that correct?
That's correct. There are no additional comments for that one.
Okay, thank you. Then moving on to minutes of the March 11th, 2024 regular meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing no raised hands, is there a motion to approve? Moved by Commissioner Solheim. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Heck. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion to approve the minutes passes unanimously. Okay, schedule of meetings. We have a regular meeting on April 8th and then on May 6th. So there's quite a break between those two meetings. And then May 20th, and those are at 5:30 and they will be virtual meetings. Okay, next I think we have the consent agenda. So it's a custom of the Plan Commission to remove from the agenda those items on which staff believes an application has had sufficient review to warrant approval with all of the conditions placed upon it by the various city departments, and on which the applicant accepts those conditions, and there are no individuals who are registered to speak in opposition. Those items are on the consent agenda along with referrals, and they are addressed at the beginning of our meeting. And then people interested in those items don't need to stick around if they don't want to. Of the items before us today, the following agenda items are proposed for the consent agenda and for referral. Agenda item 2, agenda item 4 and 5, agenda items 8 and 9 for referral and 10 for referral. And then for consent, agenda items 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 18. Are there any requests for separation of any of those items? Seeing no requests for separation, I'll read those items into the record. Number 2, determining a public purpose and necessity and adopting relocation orders for the acquisition of land interests required for the construction and maintenance of stormwater management facilities required for flood mitigation and restoration within the Old Sauk Trails Business Park, Pond, and Greenways portion of the Pheasant Branch Greenway in Alder District 9. And then item 4 and 5 are related. Agenda item 4, Legistar 81559, located at 655 West Badger Road, Alder District 14, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a 2-story commercial building. Agenda item 5, Legistar 81954, creating sections of the Madison General Ordinances to change the zoning of property located at 655 West Badger Road from suburban residential varied 2 to commercial corridor transitional district. And then for referral, agenda item 8 and 9, Legistar 81922, Legistar 81944 to be referred to the April 8th Plan Commission meeting at the request of the applicant to allow for a recommendation by the Urban Design Commission. Also referral, agenda item 10, Legistar 81562, reapproving the preliminary plat of Herring Property Subdivision on property generally addressed as 10252 through 10554 Mineral Point Road, Alder District 9. And that's a referral again at the request of the applicant to April 8th. Then for the consent agenda, agenda item 11, Legistar 81917, located at 626 Langdon Street, Alder District 2, consideration of a conditional use in the downtown residential 2 district for general retail and a coffee shop tenant in a multifamily dwelling. Agenda item 12, Legistar 81918, located at 204 West Sunset Court, Alder District 5, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish the street-facing wall of a single-family residence. Agenda item 14, Legistar 81920, located at 4701 Elstad Drive, Alder District 16, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a single-family residence. Agenda item 15, Legistar 81921, located at 5454 Buttonwood Drive, 4902 Am Center Drive, Alder District 17, consideration of a conditional use in the Commercial Center District for a vehicle access sales and service window to allow construction of a multi-tenant commercial building with a vehicle access sales and service window. Agenda item 16, Legistar 82113, located at 620 Cedar Street, Alder District 13, consideration of a conditional use in the traditional residential consistent district to construct an accessory building exceeding 1,000 square feet. And last, agenda item 18, Legistar 82120, located at 3180 Burke Road, Town of Burke, approval of a certified survey map within the city's extraterritorial jurisdiction to create 2 lots. And I will open the public hearing on those. And we have no registrants. I'll close the public hearing. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Commissioner Solheim, seconded by Commissioner Spencer. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously and the consent agenda is approved. The next item on our agenda is under new business, agenda item 3, Legistar 81653, adopting the Lake Monona Waterfront Master Plan, Alder District 4 and Alder District 13 and Alder District 14. And I believe that we will first hear from Mike Sturm, who is part of the Parks Department. And I just want to note, as you probably all know, an enormous amount of work has gone into this, this master plan proposal. Go ahead, Mike.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Hello, Commission members. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to present the draft master plan for the Lake Monona waterfront. I'm Mike Sturm, as mentioned. I'm the Parks Division Project Manager for the Planning Initiative. The master plan report is a multifaceted document with recommendations for ecology, access, transportation, and programming improvements. Tonight, I'll provide a brief overview of the plan development process, the goals of the initiative, and the plan itself. The scale and scope of the planning initiative offers a unique opportunity for Mass to shape its connection to Lake Monona. The lake is a tremendous natural resource for Madisonians. The master plan seeks to foster and enhance a greater connection with the lake for residents and park visitors alike, improving both the natural systems and access. The city has a long history of infrastructure projects taking precedence over the public connection to the lake, and the recommendations of the Lake Monona waterfront plan are focused on correcting this imbalance. The importance of the city's connections to our lakes is not a new idea. With human habitation of the Four Lakes region extending thousands of years prior to European settlement, the first people settled here due to the region's unique waterway system, and the Four Lakes were a center of culture and commerce. After native peoples were displaced with European settlement, more formal plans were prepared to shape the city's connection to the lake. Notably, in the 1900s, John Nolan's seminal plan, Madison, a Model City, proposed a large green space along the Lake Monona shore, connecting the city center to the lake. Since then, although numerous plans were developed for the lakeshore, none have been effectively implemented. The current planning effort traces its roots back to an advocacy group of design professionals who, in the 1980s, reinvigorated interest in solving the disconnect for Lake Monona. Currently, the project is supported by the Friends of the Nolan Waterfront, a nonprofit organization which grew from that original collection of volunteer advocates. A quick definition. Master plans are ultimately conceptual in nature. They are long-term documents that are intended to provide a flexible framework with regard to future improvements. Master plan implementation will require additional study, public engagement, design development prior to any construction of the master plan's recommendations. The planning area for the waterfront includes 1.7 miles of public shoreline and approximately 17 acres of public green space. The scope extends from Law Park to the north to Olin Park to the south. The areas highlighted in green are city-owned properties within the planning area. Mass and Parks work closely with several partnering city agencies, including city engineering, economic and community development, traffic engineering, and the city water utility. Plan development included the formation of an interagency team that assisted in reviewing the proposed improvements. And to provide a quick overview of the planning process. The primary phases included developing a preliminary report, holding a Lake Monona waterfront design challenge, and the recent plan refinement phase. Given the scale and scope of the initiative, the city formed the Lake Monona Waterfront Ad Hoc Committee. The committee served as the decision-making body for the planning process. Another unique aspect of plan development was holding a nationally recognized design competition to select the professional consultant team to aid the committee with the plan. The design challenge involved 3 teams participating in initial master plan submissions, presenting their work in a series of well-attended public events. The ad hoc committee was responsible for evaluating the submissions and the team's performance and select a team to proceed in the planning process. When forming the ad hoc committee, Parks received over 40 applications from individuals interested in serving on the body, and through the mayor's recommendation process, 13 were approved by the Common Council to lead the master plan effort. The 13 members represent a diverse background of experience, expertise, and perspective, and they held over 40 meetings in a 19-month period to develop the Lake Monona Waterfront Plan. The Sasaki design team was selected through a vigorous evaluation process. The team is comprised of multidisciplinary design professionals with expertise in waterfront design. Tonight, as the Parks representative, I'm presenting the work of the ad hoc committee and the Sasaki team based on the public engagement work completed during plan development. Community engagement was an extensive multi-year process. Outreach included on-site intercept interviews, tabling at community events, stakeholder listening sessions, community workshops, large public event presentations, and online surveys. The initial pre-design outreach was encapsulated in the Lake Monona Waterfront Preliminary Report. The report formed the basis of information for the design challenge and the subsequent community input on the 3 design submissions. During plan refinement, additional outreach occurred, shaping the plan you currently see. During both major plan development phases, Parks also worked closely with a consulting firm that specialized in engaging with Madison's communities of color to ensure their voices were raised in the process. Some examples of how community input was gathered. During the design challenge, over 2,400 completed surveys were received. It's one example of the level of interest that has been demonstrated by the public throughout the planning process. The surveys included over 8,000 written responses, which were carefully cataloged by type and focus by the Sasaki design team and shared with the ad hoc committee to help inform their decisions. And the overall arching goal of the master plan centered on the community goals of creating a visionary, inclusive, and environmentally focused waterfront. To guide the process, 6 principles were used in evaluating and guiding the plan development. And now for the plan itself. So the planning area is divided into 4 distinct areas: Law Park Ledge, Lake Lounge, Community Causeway, and the Olin Overlook. I'll walk through each section and provide some highlights with the intent of preserving time at the end for questions and any other further comments from committee members. First up is the Community Causeway. This will likely be the first phase of implementation, recognizing the initiative led by city engineering to reconstruct John Nolan Drive. They anticipate construction beginning in 2025, that's next year. So the causeway includes a variety of proposed improvements that foster lake access and enjoyment, including overlooks, boardwalks, fishing piers, an enhanced landscape, and the intent to create a more green edge to the Lake Monona shore, improving both aquatic habitat and shoreline habitat for native species. Transportation improvements include delineating paths of travel by rate of travel so that there's a distinct bike path, pedestrian route, and jogging route along this section of the causeway. And then again, those ecological and hydrology improvements as far as capturing and treating stormwater as much as possible along this narrow section of shore, the ecological improvements, looking at opportunities for floating wetlands, a variety of prairie types on the upland side in the green spaces, and additional tree canopy. And then also each section includes an overlay, a public art overlay as identifying opportunities for public art. The city held a really productive stakeholder work session with over 30 representatives of the Madison art community, where they looked over the plans and provided their recommendations and their thoughts on with potential locations, sort of the scale and scope and focus of potential art installations, recognizing that aspect has the capacity to also communicate the site's history, the site's culture, and also be integrated into the landscape. And then some example images of what the Community Causeway components might look like. Again, these are just example images of separated paths, naturalized landscaping, how there are opportunities for boardwalk and greater shoreline access. And then a concept image, looking back towards the Capitol, how we might be able to soften and green the existing riprap condition along the causeway. Again, providing habitat for both aquatic species and also upland species. Thinking about multi-season interest, that was a central theme as well for all sections of the master plan. And with that, I'll move further north to the Lake Lounge. The Lake Lounge has probably one of the more aspirational and I think inspired components, and that is the John Nolan Drive underpass. So it seeks to create an underpass underneath John Nolan Drive and the rail line for an uninterrupted connection from the lakeshore into Brittingham Park, with a much larger connection going to the west towards the southwest bike path. It also incorporates elements of additional peer-supported features. I think it's specifically the Hamilton Street Pier, which aligns with the Hamilton Street access. This large proposed pier amenity would provide a view back towards the Capitol, but also have improved lake access and opportunities for potential vendor space and a variety of programming. And within this section, you'll also note that there are, again, a focus on recognizing that this is a highly trafficked section of the Lake Monona shore, and providing those separated paths for cyclists that are commuting, people who are visiting and just want to take in the lakefront. And again, the hydrology and ecology pieces, and public art. And I think that one of the primary concerns that's been raised regarding potential underpass on our John Nolan Drive is what will that look like, and how is it that could be an experience that folks and visitors would want to use. And we recognize that the ad hoc committee, along with Sasaki, recognize that there's a great opportunity for art, light, really creating a different feel for that underpass versus what we typically have, experienced throughout the city, which tends to be a little bit more utilitarian. Also, programming space where there's opportunities for vendor carts, and again, kind of that the greening of the shoreline edge. And this is a computer generated graphic looking back towards the Capitol from what the Hamilton Street Pier might look like. The Capitol is framed within the buildings on both sides of Hamilton Street. There's a clear view of the full dome. It's a pretty dramatic view of the Madison cityscape, and how that of a certain scale that there's opportunities for more programming to occur on that pier. Going further south is the Olin Overlook. The ad hoc committee recognized that the northern portion of the Olin Park really serves as a hub, as a connection hub to the south side of Madison, to the Alliant Energy Center campus, to the Destination District, and recognize that there are opportunities for more programming, for a little more activation than Turtle Point, which is a conservation park further south. And that's reflected in the master plan's recommendations as far as additional features for community events, gathering spaces, playground, but then also really, again, kind of softening up. You can see a lot of the existing lawn area is being proposed as a wet mesic prairie area, so that this becomes a destination and also serves as that hub to the greater south side of Madison as well. The recommendations as far as paths of travel, and again, really kind of recognizing that there's a hierarchy of paths based on traveling speeds. Hydrology and ecology, capturing stormwater, treating it before it goes into the lake, opportunities for improving the native species within the lake itself, but then also on the upland side, so that we have those communities that foster pollinator habitat, urban wildlife. And then public art, that it's of a scale, and a scope, that can create a draw, that there's opportunities where public art can be integrated into the existing canopy that's present and on this portion of Woodland Park. And example images. One of the kind of the signature pieces that's proposed in the master plan, this is a canopy walk. And you kind of see, you can see an example of that in the lower left-hand corner. And also up in the upper right-hand corner where there's a substantial nature-based play opportunity. An aerial, kind of identifying those key areas, again, the habitat restoration that's combined with these program-focused aspects of the master plan's recommendations. Another computer-generated image. And then one of the more complex pieces of the master plan is the Law Park Ledge. And that's to the north of the Monona Terrace. And then really the defining feature here is an idea that has been presented on numerous occasions. And what it does is it essentially takes advantage of the higher elevation of East Wilson Street relative to the Lake Monona shore. And it's proposing a decking piece over John Nolan Drive, north of the Monona Terrace. The ad hoc committee also ensured that the plan provided enough flexibility so that when and if the Monona Terrace decides to expand, that there's an opportunity so that the plan can be adjusted accordingly. You can see that with the note in the dashed line, and that's directly adjacent to the terrace. But really what this section of the master plan capitalizes on is that connection to East Wilson Street between the city already has secured a public access easement between two private properties so that folks can come out above John Nolan Drive and then make their way down to the Lake Monona waterfront. And this is done with the plan provides three potential options for this to occur. One being a concession restroom elevator building that's on the lake shore to provide essentially a one-floor elevator, a very quick lift up. But directly adjacent to that is sort of a grand stair that also serves as an amphitheater, but incorporates a switchback ramp. But then also there's the opportunity where a much longer bike-focused ramp could be introduced as well. And that's to accommodate the roughly probably 15 to 17 feet of elevation change that needs to happen for clearance underneath, for clearance above both the highway and the rail line. And this helps to try to explain what's going on. I know the committee kind of struggled with this diagram a little bit, but I think it's probably does convey that idea of a switchback ramp that's built into the amphitheater stair component, how a freestanding building with vertical transportation, an elevator in it, would also facilitate that connection to the greater downtown area, and then how the bike path kind of wraps around behind the majority of that, so that when people are coming from the upper deck area down to the shore, they aren't encountering a bike path separation between them. Hydrology and ecology pieces, again. And then public art. Some really interesting ideas on what might be possible. So commission members are aware that, ultimately public art will be through the Madison Arts Commission, and they've taken a look at the plan, and we've received their support. They were also instrumental again in this larger workshop with representatives of the Madison arts community, so that again we are considering public art early on in the process and ensuring that it's a component of future plan implementation. And some example images on what that might look like. Where you have that real strong sort of stair component, but then also separation of paths and peer supported facilities that extend out over the lake. And again, that same image with less of the transportation overlay on top of it. And then the aerial back. Also noting that we're proposing reducing the amount of surface parking that's along the lake shore. And also a sort of what's been proposed as an upland beach. So this is not a beach where the sand goes directly into the water. There's a lot of regulatory pieces to why that can be challenging, but recognizing that folks enjoy sand and self-facing, and there's still access to water, be a step down component to it. Sort of maximizing what could happen in that space. And also the idea of a potential boathouse. So with that, I've covered the four primary areas of the master plan. And what I'd like to do is open it up for questions from commission members. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Mike. First, we will go to public comment. The first registrant is Linda Leonards, Patterson Street, Madison, neither support nor opposed and wishing to speak. Linda, you have 3 minutes. Could you take the shared screen off for now, Mike? Thank you.
Sure.
I would just briefly like to talk primarily about money. The city's projecting a $27 million structural deficit for the next year, and yet the waterfront plan on page 195 calls for the city to be responsible for maintenance. It says, quote, fund allocation for the master plan in the city's budget should also support ongoing operations and maintenance of constructed projects, as well as contribute to the design and construction efforts for phases of the master plan. There's been no discussion about what those might cost or how that's going to fit into the budget. Similarly, with construction costs, it looks like there's a lot of hope there's going to be private donations, but yet how realistic is that? The public market couldn't reach its original goal of $4 million. It only raised $2.5 million. And that was only because TrueStage donated $1.5 million near the end of the campaign, which included naming rights for the Market Ready Hall. So it sounds like a grand plan, but there's no money issues addressed. A couple other things. It's been called a grand staircase, but it's an awful lot of concrete, and it's an awful lot of salt during the winter that can go into the water. And I find it disturbing that we're creating fishing piers for people to fish when there's fish advisories due to the PFAS in the lake. So, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Our next registrant is Mike, Lakeside Street, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. Is that you, Mike, who registered as just Mike, Parks Department? Is there another registrant by the name of Mike from the Parks Department?
No, I believe that's my registration. I apologize, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Then we have heard from all of our registrants. Are there questions of any of Linda before we move to questions for staff? Questions of Linda before we move to questions of Mike? Seeing no raised hands, thank you, Linda. Are there questions of Mike? Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. And thanks, Mike, for the presentation. I assume you've gotten really good at giving this, given all the bodies and community groups and things that you've been in front of. Just a couple of questions. I guess maybe I think it would be a good idea, to the best of your ability, to discuss very briefly kind of timeline and how that interacts with the city's budget. That would be my first question.
Certainly, great question, and I appreciate the opportunity. So I think master plan implementation will be measured in decades. I think that's safe to say. The intent of the ad hoc committee was to set a long-term vision, and as far as immediate plans, the Parks Division has some funding in 2026 to begin a first phase of implementation along the causeway. But beyond that, we don't have any immediate budgetary requests beyond that. And the intent is that with a master plan, with an adopted master plan, it gives the city the opportunity to begin pursuing outside funding resources. And whether it's federal or state or private, an adopted plan sets the vision for, again, a long-term implementation. So we are aware of where the concerns with the city's operating budget. But again, it is intended to be a very long-term project. It is conceptual in nature. Each phase will be brought back through all the committees. There'll be more public engagement before any construction work begins. So I think that the goal here is to recognize that it's important to have something to work towards. That is, in a lot of aspects, aspirational, but there are other pieces that are much more attainable. But to have a concise, holistic vision for the waterfront, and that was the goal of the ad hoc committee, to my understanding.
Thank you. You mentioned public engagement opportunities in the future, and I was going to ask about that based on your slide that said future engagement. So you envision as pieces of the master plan might come to fruition, that's where the public engagement would be kind of piecemeal with the different portions that might be heading towards approval.
Exactly. So it's and I apologize. I'm probably getting this wrong, but from my days on the other side, when I worked in private with a private firm, the city had a process where you would have a general development plan. And then when you were ready to build something, you would come forward with what's called a specific implementation plan. And I think that it's important to kind of maybe see the master plan as really a general development plan, and then the individual pieces will be brought forward once we've secured funding, once we have sort of a defined budget and defined scope, and we will be going through community engagement again, and then also, as I mentioned, just back through the committee process for approval. Simply to release that project for construction works bidding that's necessary. So,
thanks. And do you anticipate that the first opportunity would be as we approach 2025 for the causeway replacement?
Correct. So we're in the capital budget process now, and so that's kind of where we'll be requesting funding, and we would be reaching out and holding community meetings with the understanding that if that funding gets approved, that would be the process. I could probably phrase that a little bit more cleaner. So with anticipating that we have an adopted master plan in the coming months, that the Parks Division is preparing to start the first phase of implementation, and we're working to secure a contract with Sasaki for both that early schematic design development of those causeway components, and included in that is additional community engagement, and also additional committee reviews, city committee reviews, before that project would be released for public works bidding.
Thank you. And sorry, my last question, apologies, commissioners. A very specific question. We had some written public comment about the section of the paths that run underneath Monona Terrace and why those weren't included in the redesign. And as somebody who cycles through there very often. I'm curious if they're not included, does that mean they're apt to stay in the current design?
Mhm. So that section of the bike path is structurally tied to the Monona Terrace building itself. So especially at the part that runs right along, I cycle that section as well, and I'm well aware of some of the limitations there. So it is literally part of the building, and that concrete ribbon wall, the wall right along, that's actually it's a component piece of the facility of the Frank Lloyd Wright design. And the intent in not including it is that both we want to respect our partners at the Monona Terrace, because that's ultimately their property, that's the building that is owned by the city, but ultimately, it's not Parks Division purview, that section of bike path. And that it is a Frank Lloyd Wright building. And any modifications to our Frank Lloyd Wright building would have to go through the Frank Lloyd Wright, pardon me, I'm trying to remember the name of the foundation. There's a foundation that manages all of his work, and any modifications to that would need to go through them. So that's one of the, with all those pieces, all those considerations, the intent was to not modify that section of bike path with the master plan process.
Okay, thank you very much.
Taliesin Foundation.
Next is Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if I missed this at the beginning, but Mike, what is the timeline for the plan to get to council?
It is going to the Board of Park Commissioners next week. And then I believe it's the April 17th, it is going back to council for action.
All right, thank you. And thank you for the presentation.
Are there other questions of Mike? Seeing no raised hands, I do have a couple of questions. Mike, one thing that I was wondering about, is there any lake fill that is required based upon this plan design?
Certainly, thank you. That's a great question. So with regard to lake fill, and maybe just kind of back up a little bit. So just so commission members are aware, is that Lake Monona is designated by the Wisconsin DNR as a flood storage area. So any net decrease in capacity has to be made up somewhere else somehow. So you can't displace a certain amount of lake water and then not provide an accommodating cut along at some point in the shoreline. So with that, we have reached out early on to representatives in the DNR so that they're aware of kind of the planning process that the city's undertaking. We've had some conversations with the regional director as well. And I think to answer the question is that there are some sections that we're proposing modifications to the shoreline. The team was really focusing on trying to ensure that those were being balanced out as much as possible. I think that it's important to note, though, that there is one area that we might have to look at, that there will be some lake displacement that would have to be accommodated in another location, and that's primarily at the entrance to the John Nolan Drive underpass. And that's simply because to get those paths to kind of drop down and then wrap in and provide sort of a more gracious entry point to that underpass, that is one location that has the potential to require a seawall, where we would be, again, displacing lake volume, and then it would be the city's responsibility to identify another section of shoreline or another area where we would be reducing or providing the opportunity to take up that volume. And I know that that's all very vague. You're very early in this process. I think that there are ways where accommodating that displacement in a different section of shoreline could also prove to be beneficial. That there might be areas where we have low-lying areas that are low-quality wetlands, that type of thing, where we might be able to work out a reasonable approach that's acceptable to the regulatory bodies involved. I think it's a complex aspect, and it's a great question. We're starting to set that dialogue up with the appropriate regulatory bodies, And, based on what the design team has prepared, it really is primarily that one location that might have some lake displacement. Based on the current configuration that's proposed, there might be a way of kind of tightening that up and so forth as well. Minimize that. And Chair, hopefully I'm answering your question, but
Yes.
you'll note that I used the term peer supported. We're looking at a lot of peer supported amenities, just recognizing that that it avoids that flood storage area concern. And it provides a way to get closer to the lake. And we also know that just because of the firsthand knowledge of the Monona Terrace and its overhang, it provides great fish habitat.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much, Mike. One other question that I do have is, at one point, the city was required to go to referendum when there were changes in parks along the shoreline. Is that still in effect, or has that been?
That is still in effect. That's a great, you have excellent questions, Chair. Thank you. So let's see. 8.35 ordinance, city ordinance 8.35, preservation of shoreline parks. So any project that exceeds a certain dollar value, and it's stipulated within the ordinance itself, and I think I'm speaking off the top of my head. I haven't. It accrues or it gets prorated. I think it's about over 2 million. Any specific construction project over 2 million needs to go to citywide referendum for improvements within a city park. So that is still standing. We're aware of it, and it's really about a specific construction project. So
any city park, not just shoreline.
No, it's park shoreline.
Okay. Okay.
Yes,
Very good.
yeah,
Okay.
sorry,
Thank you. Okay.
Picking my
Thank
way
you.
through that. Yes, thanks.
Are there? Okay. Commissioner Heck.
Sorry, I thought of one more question. Mike, do you anticipate there would need to be any large changes to the easternmost part of the plan should an Amtrak station end up in downtown Madison?
So that's great. That's a great question because that's been on the committee and design team's radar as well. We feel like that again. There's enough flexibility. What the committee and the team focused on was those vertical transportation pieces, the elevator and the ramping and so forth, are within the park proper of Law Park, so that it provides the greatest amount of flexibility for the terrace expansion or a potential Amtrak station to occur, north of the Monona Terrace. So I think that again, the goal was to provide flexibility, as much flexibility, but really kind of consolidating those connecting pieces for the waterfront within Law Park itself, within the footprint of Law Park.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If not, then I'm looking for a motion.
Motion to adopt?
Commissioner Solheim.
I was just seconding the motion made by Alder Figueroa Cole.
Oh, I didn't hear. Sorry. So there was a motion then by Alder Figueroa Cole to adopt the Lake Mendota Waterfront Master Plan, seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Moving on then to agenda items 6 and 7, which are related and will be considered as one public hearing. Following the public hearing, the Plan Commission will make separate findings and motions on each agenda item. So agenda item 6, Legistar 81565, located at 4284 through 444 State Street, Alder District 2, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish 3 mixed-use buildings. Agenda item 7, Legistar 69792. Same location, consideration of a conditional use in the downtown core district for a new building and consideration of a conditional use for non-residential development immediately adjacent to the boundary of a city-owned public park to allow construction of a 6-story tall mixed-use building containing up to 6,445 square feet of commercial space and 26 apartments adjacent to Lisa Link Peace Park. So first we will hear from Kevin Furco, giving us an overview. Kevin?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members of the Plan Commission. Before you on this one, as the Chair had mentioned, we've got 2 sets of requests. We have a demolition permit for 3 structures and for 428, 434, and 444 State Street. And then we have conditional uses to allow for a building taller than 4 stories in the downtown core zoning district. The other conditional use before the Plan Commission, in addition to the exceeding building height over 4 stories, is non-residential development adjacent to a city park. The redevelopment of the site was last before the Plan Commission in June of 2023. Very similar sets of requests. At that time, the Plan Commission found that the demolition standards were not met and placed the demolition request for the same 3 buildings on file without prejudice, and the related conditional use requests were indefinitely referred. Tonight, before the Plan Commission, is again the demolition request for the same 3 buildings, and also the previous conditional use request that was in referral is no longer out of referral, is coming out of referral tonight. So I do want to stress that these are the same plans that went to the Urban Design Commission and were in the Plan Commission's packet back in June of 2023. Just a little bit of additional information.
Hi, Brett, comma.
Oh, sorry, I think, okay, sorry. Just to jump back in here, just to talk a little bit about the standards and some of the previous actions. I would note that the staff report doesn't include analysis compared to the demolition and the conditional use standards. In relationship to the demolition standards, the summary of the advisory recommendation from the Landmarks Commission is included in your packets, or included in your staff report, and it is a similar recommendation to what they provided last year. The Landmarks Commission, at its January 8th meeting, recommended to the Plan Commission that the buildings at 428 and 430 State Street and 432 through 436 State Street have historic value based on their status as contributing structures to a National Register Historic District, and the building at 440 through 444 State Street has historic value related to the vernacular context of Madison's built environment and its intact condition, which could make it a contributing to a potential National Register District. Again, that was similar to the recommendation that the Landmark Commission previously provided. Shifting gears from the demolition permit, then are the conditional use requests. And staff will note again that these are the same development plans that were previously before you. Going back to last year, the Urban Design Commission did recommend approval of the development, and there is one condition of approval recommended by the Urban Design Commission having to do with brick detailing, and staff can speak to that. So staff's recommendation is similar to what was in the previous staff report and believes it may be possible for the Plan Commission to find the standards are met. And if the Plan Commission can find the standards are met, should recommend approval subject to the recommended conditions and the input at this evening's public hearing. Regardless of the final action of the Plan Commission on both the items today, it's important that the Plan Commission makes very clear findings on both the demolition and conditional use requests. With that, staff is available to answer questions after the public hearing. Thank you.
I know the applicants are not pooling time, but we have a request from opposition to pool time, Robert Kleba and David Waugh. We will start with Kevin Burrow, Greenway Boulevard, Middleton, in support, wishing to speak, representing Kanothi Bruce Architects. Kevin, you have 3 minutes.
Right. Good evening.
This is Kevin Burrow with Northern Bridge Architects. If we could show my presentation slides. As was mentioned by Kevin Furco very succinctly, this is the exact same project that was submitted a year ago and presented at Plan Commission back in June of last year. So the site is immediately adjacent to Lisa Link Peace Park, as you can see here, and in the middle of the 400 block of State Street. If you go to the next slide, please. Our overall site concept plan is shown here, where you can see how we have located the building directly on the sidewalk as appropriate for all State Street projects. And we are being very sensitive to the adjacency to Lisa Link Peace Park. That was one of the major negotiation factors for this project, is meeting with the Parks Department and ensuring that we do not harm any of the existing trees or vegetation north of our property on the park property. So we've located this building accordingly. And what you see here is a roof plan view where you can see above the 4th floor level, the building does step back 30 feet as is required along State Street. And we rise up for one more apartment, which is a lofted apartment, which technically takes us up to 6 stories with 5 floors of occupied space. And we do have green roof features factored in for the roof area. If you go to the next slide, please. The overall plans are shown here, working from right to left. We've got the commercial space on both the lower level and the main floor plan area of the building, and the apartment unit entry is on the farthest right-hand side, leading to enclosed stairs and elevator, and our bike parking is located in the basement level. And then on 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor, it's a mixture of 1-bedroom and studio apartments, which make up the majority of the building. And then as the 5th floor, as you see on the left-hand side, the building does step back to 30 feet. We create a large roof patio for all residents to be able to use. And that one apartment is actually a 5-bedroom apartment, which has bedrooms on the main level and then lofted above as well. So that just makes one more additional unit. So a total of 26 units on this building. You go to the next slide, please. Here's perspective views that show how this really does present as an appropriate 4-story building directly on State Street. And we have worked extensively with Urban Design Commission, presenting this a few times and received final approval from them last year. And this is the exact same design that they approved, with the character of high-level detailing on the masonry and a facade treatment to provide a varied facade along State Street. As you can see, the middle portion is recessed back. We have windows on all sides. We're able to provide ample viewing to the park area as well. And the commercial space is on 1st floor. Next slide, please. You can see the front view here along State Street with the commercial space and the apartment unit entry on the far right. Next slide, please. Here's another view straight on. As you notice, you do not see the 5th or 6th floors, just a slight glimpse in these renderings. Next slide, please. Here's a further view. Further down State Street, you can get a glimpse of that lofted area, but it has been recessed back. Next slide. Here's the backside along Lisa Link Peace Park. You can see we have an art feature wall located in the middle and numerous windows and balconies that overlook the park to help provide security to the park, actually, by having more eyes in the park. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Kevin. That concludes your available time.
Thank you.
Our next registrant is Ashley Levy, State Street, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. Ashley, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I oppose this demolition and construction as the plan has currently been submitted. I'm a business owner on State Street and right across from this location, and I'm actually a former commercial tenant of 440 and 444 State Street, so I'm very familiar with this property and with the site. The letter of intent that was submitted by the applicant is something that I am strongly opposed to. I think this building is too tall. I think it ruins the look and feel of State Street. I think that overlooking Lisa Link Park with a 4-story building, 6 stories at its tallest point is going to cut down drastically on sunlight in the park and the ability of residents and visitors to enjoy the space. As you know, there's already really limited green space on State Street already, and I worry about the impact that this building will have on that space, in addition to the impact that this building and construction will have on wildlife in the space because it's one of so few green spaces downtown. Further in the staff comments document, comment 43C from the Parks Division. The Parks Division mentions the removal and restoration of existing light fixtures in Lisa Link Peace Park during construction, which raises a great deal of public safety concerns on my end if this is not well lit during the construction period. The Landmarks Commission has recommended that the Plan Commission that all 3 of the buildings have historic value and that this be considered whether or not to approve their demolition. And the applicant has provided information on the condition of the buildings, suggesting that the Plan Commission consider the condition of the buildings in their decision. And I want it to be known that as a former commercial tenant, I do not have confidence in J.D. McCormick based on my experience of their neglect of these buildings. And they are now citing these buildings' condition as a reason for consideration for the city to approve these plans in the demolitions report. But the buildings have been under their ownership for years now with no attempt at repairs. And again, I'm speaking firsthand as a former commercial tenant. Additionally, J.D. McCormick cited that the buildings are currently vacant as reasoning for why it should be approved to demolish them. But it was only after a short time that J.D. McCormick acquired the building that I was told that my lease would not be renewed because of their intent to demolish the buildings. And this was prior to 2020. And the space has really struggled to be filled since then. I also worry about the previous denial of demolition permit based on standard number 7, which addresses health, safety, and welfare of the city of Madison. I would like that the reuse and recycling plan be made available for public comment before any decision is made by the city. And finally, the project schedule outlined in the letter is very concerning. The estimated project timeline is fall 2024 through 25, and independent businesses on State Street are already hurting. We are in the final phases of a project at the corner of State and Johnson, and I don't know that my small business can weather another summer of construction near my store. We lose walk-in traffic from tourists and residents alike due to the ongoing construction. People go out of their way to avoid it, which means I lose business.
Thank you, Ashley. That concludes your available time. The next registrant is Colin Smith, North Mills Street, Madison, in support, wishing to speak, representing J.D. McCormick Properties.
Hi. So I had planned on presenting along with Kevin's slideshow. We've got a bunch of pictures showing the different qualities of the buildings. They are in a state of disrepair, and this was prior to us taking on the buildings. When we took them on, they had been neglected. We worked very closely with some of the shop owners, like Freedom Skate Shop, on taking care of them. The building where Freedom Skate Shop and B-Side Records are, I haven't even been able to get people to go down into the basement because there is a staircase that fell off, foundational issues. The basement frequently has standing water. All of these issues are ones that we've had construction crews look at on how to repair, and the cost to repair them outweighs the useful life of the building. These buildings are not meant to stand for over 100 years. They've been neglected, and with our new building, we really want to bring like a new fresh look to this part of State Street. After looking at other projects like the State Historical Society, our buildings are in way worse condition than those buildings were, and they were approved for demolition. So really we're trying to do something good on the street. We work closely with all of our tenants, so I'm surprised to hear Ashley say that. I wish I would have known more about that, but these buildings are in pretty rough shape with mold, foundational issues, everything like that. That's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Our next registrant is Linda Leonards, South Patterson Street, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. Linda, you have 3 minutes.
Hi. Excuse me. I'd like first to comment on a few things that McCormick Company just said. One being the buildings aren't meant to last over 100 years. I live in a house that's 120 years old, and it's still going strong. So those buildings were built to last. They just haven't been taken care of. he said that the cost of repairs would exceed the value to some extent. There's no evidence of that in the record. And he compared it to the State Historical Society demolition. And that had nothing really to do with the condition of the buildings. What it had to do with was the good that was going to be presented to the city or to the state, or however you want to phrase it, and that overrode the demolition. So last June, the Plan Commission found standard number 7 was not met. So what's changed since then? Very little. Some commissioners had mentioned not knowing about the condition of the building, and the applicant purports to address that concern in this new application. The letter of intent claims these structures are well past their prime and have numerous structural and health issues with them. Most of the issues reflected in the photos are the result of water infiltration. Yes, there's mold, but it can be cleaned. Water infiltration can be fixed with a new roof. To my comment letter, I attached what building permits had been pulled since 1996, the start of the city's permitting database. And there's only 2 things that arguably do anything in terms of the building condition. The photos that are shown purport to show crumbling stone foundations. And for a number of these, it's not a crumbling foundation. Issue number 5 shows the plaster over the lathe breaking apart, not the foundation. A couple of them show crumbling parge coats. They talk about collapsed foundation demise walls. Well, demise walls are merely separate spaces in the building. They're not structural walls. And certainly a historic building shouldn't be demolished because of the bad toilet. An opinion of a structural engineer would have been much more valuable than a building construction site management manager. A structural engineer could have identified the extent of any structural concerns and how those concerns could be addressed. I gave a link to a structural engineer thing in my comment letter, and they give an assessment. For example, in that one, even though there were a few structural things, they said overall it's good. There's some isolated areas of repairs that needed to be fixed. And when you look at it in contrast to the Historical Society, which adding 20 units doesn't really aid in the implementation of adopted city plans. It's a balancing thing. The comprehensive plan has now 7 elements. One of them is culture and character.
Thank you. That does conclude your available time. The next registrant is Robert Kleba and David Waugh. And then they have chosen to pool their time, which means they have a total of 6 minutes. Robert, is East Gorham, Madison opposed and wishing to speak? You have together a total of 6 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I felt it was important to testify separately, we felt it was important to testify separately on the 2 different agenda items because there are different arguments for against the demolition and against the conditional use permit application. So I'll start with agenda item 6 here. You are reviewing a demolition application that your commission did not approve last year because you felt then the application did not meet the approval standards for demolition. The only thing that has changed since then is the applicant has provided some photographs of the current condition of the buildings. I was lucky to be able to buy the old Governor's Mansion, an almost 170-year-old building, easily 50 years older than 428 and 434. The condition of the applicant's basements remind me of the issues we had to address in our building, only in this instance on a much smaller scale. What you are seeing in these photos is the applicant's demonstration of demolition by neglect. All the problems in the photos can easily be corrected. There's a hole in the plaster, put up some drywall. If the drain pipe leaks, chop it out and replace with new. The basement has water, install a sump pump. All these issues homeowners in my neighborhood deal with every day. We have not had the privilege to review a professional survey of these buildings under review. All we see are photos showing them at their worst. Do not be misled. Nothing has changed in these buildings since you reviewed them last year and found then that they did not meet the standards of demolition. If the problems were truly serious, the applicant could have hired a building systems engineer to provide a report. Furthermore, neither the city building inspection nor Madison Fire Department has commented on their condition. We have no credible evidence that these buildings are in disrepair. If deferred maintenance was used as an excuse to demolish these buildings, which are an integral part of the historic fabric of State Street, almost any building owner from the 100 block to the 500 block could use the same excuse to demolish the rest of the 19th and early 20th century buildings on State Street that make this area Madison's iconic downtown street. As you consider this demolition application, don't worry about Standard 7. Worry more about the precedent of how we maintain that which makes downtown Madison interesting. I urge the commission to refer this demolition application with prejudice. And for agenda item 7, the proposed development for a 6-story building on the 400 block of State Street is one that would have a deleterious effect on how we perceive our iconic State Street. Any demolition of 19th and early 20th century buildings on State Street from the 100 block to the 500 block would change the pedestrian feel and the architectural rhythm and flow of our downtown. I request that the commission consider carefully approval standard 4, which states, the establishment of the conditional use will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of surrounding a property for uses permitted in the district. I assert that if the proposed 6-story building is approved, it will serve as the most significant precedent that could force a cascade of development on State Street from the 500 block to the Capitol Square. I concede that the current zoning promotes 4 stories on the front elevation and up to 6 in the rear. However, if even half the properties on State Street were developed in this way, we would lose what makes our downtown unique and welcoming. Instead of a sunny pedestrian street, we could end up with an urban canyon. Furthermore, developers will use the precedent to push for even greater building heights. Coincidentally, the same applicant for this agenda item tonight is promoting a 12-story building on the 100 block, clearly pushing the accepted height limits beyond the current plans. When you stand on the 500 block and look east toward the Capitol, it is clear that the proposed development would have a large impact on how we perceive this most important part of State Street. I ask the commission to carefully consider how it will affect the look and feel of this area and preservation of our shared historic resources. I urge the commission to refer this land use application with prejudice. Thank you.
And there is some time left, it looks like, for David Waugh. David, how much time does David have, Kevin, remaining?
1 minute and 20 seconds left.
Okay. David?
We're good. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Then moving on. Are there any other registrants, Kevin, for this item?
I will double check, but I believe there are no other registrants to speak. I'll refresh the list right now.
We do have one registered at Lynn Bjorkman,
Okay.
District 13, Madison, Wisconsin.
Great. Thank you. And in support or opposition?
Opposition.
Okay, Lynn, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. In June, you found that the proposal to demolish the 400 block State Street buildings did not meet the standards, specifically number 7, set out in the city's demolition ordinance. The change in the applicant's demolition application that you're hearing tonight has been the addition solely of interior photos of the building as part of a condition report. I'd like to point to one section of the staff report for your consideration related to standard number 6. Quote, while the condition of a building to be raised shall be considered, it does not specify that a certain structural condition or level of disrepair is necessary in order to approve a demolition. Notably, my emphasis, Planning staff has not received any comments from the building inspection, fire, or police department divisions on the existing buildings, unquote. Certainly, condition issues related to historic buildings can be corrected through regular maintenance and sensitive rehabilitation, as you've heard tonight from other speakers. I urge the Commission to strongly consider the Landmark Commission's finding that the 3 buildings all have historic value, 2 of which were given the city's highest recommendation of historic value, and consistent with the purposes of the city's demolition ordinance to, quote, ensure the preservation of historic buildings, unquote, affirm the Commission's earlier denial of the application. Dating from the 1880s onward, the 3 buildings represent styles, building types, and materials that cannot be replaced. Their continuing presence tells a more complete story of the development and economic history along Madison's premier street. History that would be obliterated through a, quote, fresh look, unquote. I ask you to deny approval to ensure that State Street remains as one of the city's most important historical urban resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Is that the last registrant wishing to speak? Yes. Okay. Are there, Alder Bennett, do you have your hand raised? Did you wish to speak as part of the public?
No, I just like had my hand raised for when questions are up.
Oh, okay. Well, we do have questions now of the registrants. Did you have a question of a registrant?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, please.
I'm wondering if Colin Smith could finish the presentation of the photos. I believe that the presentation might have had issues.
Colin?
So on Kevin's slides, there's about 3 more slides that weren't able to be shown.
Okay.
There a way we can bring those up? So some of these are the pictures that we are talking about, some of the conditions. I mean, we've got like the black mold, asbestos in there. We've got regular leaking. This one isn't terrible. If you go down to the next page, this would be the center building. Oh, sorry, one more. Yeah. So this is the center building with the former B-side and Freedom Skate Shop. And, you know, you can see complete foundational walls in this bottom right-hand corner one that are collapsed, and they've been collapsed. There's a lot of water penetration through the foundation. There's holes between the buildings, stairs falling off, the plumbing's completely gone. B-side Records completely trashed the place before moving out, and so there's a lot of wrecked items in there. We just wanted to show that, you know, we've looked at these buildings, they were in terrible shape before we bought them, and, you know, we want to build something new and nice in this location that's going to be for the good of everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Colin. Did you have any further questions, Alder Bennett?
Yeah, I have a couple. I'm wondering, because there is like questions about if this could be repaired, what would it take for you to repair these buildings, including the foundational issues, the asbestos, water damage, all that you described?
I don't even know where to start with it. I mean, just getting down into the basement of Freedom and B-side, we've had quotes to rebuild the stairs that are in the thousands, just to like get into the foundations, try to figure out what's going on, figure out where the water's coming from. We don't even know where to start with the basement down there. I mean, you can barely get to the basement, let alone through the basement. I mean, this is about as far as you can get through the basement, and this is right at the bottom of the stairs. So it would be very, very expensive.
Thank you, Colin. Did you have further questions, Alder Bennett?
Yes, I do. I'm wondering No, with the water damage issue, is that something that just occurred naturally, or did it have something to do with how the building was built?
I mean, it was a bad design. Some of these buildings are not, I mean, there's a difference between the old house and like an old commercial building. These things were put up quick. The foundation is some mortar and rock or stone and some brick. I mean, there's water penetration in almost every commercial building on State Street. And these, I've been in a good chunk of the basements in State Street, and the Freedom Skate Shop one is definitely the worst that I've been into. They're just, it's a bad design. I mean, you can see here in the top right picture, there's actually like an opening between these two buildings that's exposed to the elements. It's water going straight into both sides of the building. It's just they were poorly designed back when they were built, and you know, they've been there for a lot of years with a lot of different people coming through as commercial tenants, and every time a commercial tenant comes through, they put their own twist and spin and wear and tear on it.
Mm. And what's the extent to which there's asbestos in these buildings?
So we haven't done a full test, but definitely in the ceilings, a lot of the piping for the mechanical systems, and then a lot of the flooring will have the asbestos puck under them, which then to remove the asbestos and everything would be a ton of money to then have to rebuild it back on these repairs. Not to mention all the plumbing system, heating systems, everything.
And lastly, if this were to not pass today, would you feel comfortable putting, like, for the safety of the tenants, renting this out to anyone else?
No, especially, I mean, B-side or Freedom, you know, we worked with Jeff. Jeff is like a good friend outside of all the work stuff as well. And I didn't feel safe having him in there anymore. I mean, you can walk in these floors and feel the entire floor starting to give out.
Thank you.
Are there questions, further questions of the registrants? Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. I've got a question for Colin based on the photos that are currently up, so it'd be helpful if those stayed up. Colin, we heard in public comment that some of the walls that are pictured are not exterior walls, that some of them are not, I guess, load bearing, or it's really hard to tell what we're looking at. For instance, that one in the lower right in what's currently up, I'm not sure what I'm looking at. Can you kind of describe that? What direction am I looking? Or
so you're looking from the back of the building towards State Street in the B-side and Freedom buildings. This is the center wall that is the supporting wall for the center of the building. And that's one of the big issues for the sagging and the floor falling out. It's also caused a lot of structural issues throughout the rest of the building.
So it's a brick wall that runs parallel to State Street? Is that what I'm looking at?
Perpendicular. So it would be running from the back of the building to State Street.
I see. Okay. And on the other side of that brick wall, what am I looking at? The space between the two buildings? No, because it's
yes, the one right above it.
No, but what am I looking at on the other side of that wall in the lower right?
That is, if you go, that's the front of the building. So that's how much stuff has fallen down. There's ceiling that's fallen down. There's center wall that's fallen over. You can barely get into that basement. And, you know, I am completely open book. If people want to look at it, like, it's a terrible basement. Jeff from Freedom, you know, he showed me all this, like, right after we bought it. We went down there, and I mean, it's really dangerous. And so
did you look at this this stuff when you bought the building?
Yeah, so this was in disrepair when we bought it, and the plan was to redevelop these buildings, and that was part of the reason that we bought the portfolio. We saw
okay.
that, it's right on State Street. These buildings had been neglected. We saw a need to make this area a little nicer. I mean, even in the park right now, we consistently are contacted by the cops that people are sleeping in the back stairways, that there's issues going on there. And so we are just wanting to kind of clean up this area.
Okay,
That
thanks.
these buildings are at. Yeah.
You answered my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Did you have any further questions, Commissioner Heck? Okay. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. Also, a question or two for Colin, just tailing off what was just being discussed. Can you confirm when you purchased the properties?
Would have been late 2018.
And it sounds like from what you described that the plan when purchasing those was to redevelop. You had no intent to utilize the existing buildings. Is that correct?
I mean, that was one of our initial thoughts of the building, was to redevelop it. Being right there on Peace Park, we thought it'd be a really iconic building. We thought it would be well accepted, and these buildings are old; they're in terrible shape, and we wanted to do something nice about it.
And last question, have you done any major maintenance or projects on the building since acquiring in 2018?
Not these ones specifically, but the other ones that we've purchased in this portfolio, we've spent tons of money trying to revitalize and save these buildings. Like 506, 508 was another one that we bought in this portfolio, and we've sunk about probably 700,000 into making sure that one stays up and in good shape. And I mean, we're here to keep what's there on State Street, but also improve what's there on State Street.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Mendez.
Thank you. So this is for Colin as well. Part of the conditional use request is to go 6 stories, so above the 4-story DC zoning. Is it imperative that your development get the 2 additional stories?
I mean, we're just going for what the building's actually zoned for. That area is zoned for 4 up, setback of 30, and then 2 up from there. So we're right in line with what's zoned, what's been in the height map, what's been approved by the city of Madison.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions of any of our registrants? Any further questions? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. Most likely this is for Kevin. Kevin, I know in the landmarks ordinance, we have a demolition by neglect section that a property owner can actually be penalized for demolition by neglect for landmarked properties or in a local historic district. This is not the case in this situation. If building inspection doesn't cite a property owner, they can defer maintenance and let their building fall down, presumably with no repercussions, as long as the building inspection doesn't get involved. Is that the case?
Well, I guess as far as because I'm not, Commissioner Heck, if you could kind of repeat the exact question there.
I guess I'm asking, can a property owner let their building collapse, for instance, as long as building inspection doesn't get involved?
I think maybe I will quickly, I can speak to the Plan Commission's role and kind of the standards related to condition, but Building Inspection Director Matt Tucker is here with us this evening and turned his camera on, so maybe Matt had something to say at the onset.
Matt, did you wish to speak?
Sure, I can respond to that. Thanks, Commissioner Heck, for the question. A property owner is going to be required to maintain the exterior of their property, basically, principally first and foremost. We may be called into a building that has like a commercial building that's open. The levels of the building are open to customers, guests or similar people, and to inspect and order repairs. We would not end up in the lower levels of the building or the private areas of the building without some potentially like inspection warrant or authorization from the property owner to look in those spaces and inspect them to see if they need we might require more information to determine the condition of those spaces. You, by and large, though, you're not going to be able to let your building crumble to the ground because the exterior alone is going to need to be continuously maintained. And, walls will start to buckle and joints crack and things like that, which will our office will inspect from public areas and require to be corrected.
So unless there's would it be safe to say unless there's a complaint by a tenant or visitor, these buildings wouldn't be inspected on a regular basis on the interior?
Well, they won't be inspected by our office unless we're invited in, but most property owners will inspect their properties to understand the condition of their properties, to see what kind of investing they need to do to maintain their properties. Old buildings are always tricky because they're just built differently, and it takes a different level of investment or reinvestment with old buildings to maintain or to significantly remodel them for the purposes of maybe the next 100 years.
Okay, thanks. And then just to make sure, the first part of my question that I think Kevin might have been willing to answer, I'm not sure, but I think Matt, you could too, about that there is no demolition by neglect in ordinance if you're not a landmarked building or in a local historic district, right? I just want to make sure that's the case.
There is not. Like I said, if a building gets to that condition, regardless of its status landmark or not, our office is going to get involved in the maintaining of the building, principally the exterior, and required to be repaired.
Okay, thank you. Those were my questions.
Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Matt answered all my questions. Thank you.
Okay. Well, while Matt's in the hot seat, I've got a couple of questions since there's no other hands. Matt, one of the things that, two of the things that were mentioned by the applicant as being support for them wanting to demolish the buildings. One was asbestos. And my question is, what percentage of buildings older than, let's say, 75 years or so would have asbestos in them that might need to be taken care of? I ask that as an owner also of an old building that we needed to do asbestos remediation. What percentage of them would have the asbestos issue, would you say?
Oh, this is a good one. I love to have an audience on this one. Let's go with 100%, to be perfectly honest. Every building needs to be checked by a licensed asbestos abatement specialist. These are private contractors. They're certified through the DNR. Our office really has nothing to do with them. Sometimes the public health department gets involved when we see people dumping asbestos. We've had that happen here and there. But basically, it's safe to assume asbestos is in all old buildings and needs to be properly mitigated prior to demolition or remodeling occurring.
Okay. And the second question having to do with something that was mentioned as a reason for demolition. They mentioned black mold. Can you comment about that and the ability to remediate that?
I can comment a little bit about it. Mold comes to the city and to the Public Health Madison and Dane County staff from basically two angles. My department deals with surface mold, or mold that's on surfaces or similar, and it's basically a function of water and a lack of ventilation and things like that gets into the building. And we require mold to be mitigated, and there's a variety of ways to do that. The Public Health Madison and Dane County staff deal with the indoor air quality aspect of mold. Their website has quite a bit of information about mitigating mold. My understanding is mold can be mitigated. It is a type of thing that does require some investment, but it isn't necessarily on its own something that would require a project to be or building to be demolished. So, often when we're dealing with some of these situations, you're dealing with more than just mold. You're dealing with rot that might be in structural components of the building. And you're dealing with some of this stuff in the lowest or the structural levels of the building, which can be significant. There is an endless amount of money that you can throw into projects, but that doesn't mean you end up with a good project at the end of the day. And a lot of these buildings that are built like this that end up having these water problems, that end up having mold problems, have a whole lot more going on too. As you could probably see in the pictures, there was some pretty ugly looking stairs there.
Thank you. We do have some more questions now. Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. A question that related to the materials that were submitted with the photographs and such. There was some of the evidence seemed to imply that aspects of the building that perhaps weren't ADA compliant could be a justification for demolition. I assume the cost to make them ADA compliant was what was being referenced. Aren't most buildings like that grandfathered in unless you do some major renovation, or how does that work?
Kevin,
Sure.
Or is that Matt? Okay,
That's
Matt.
me again.
Okay,
Thank you, Chair. So with accessibility renovations, there is a certain amount of money that needs to be spent on accessibility related measures when you're doing a remodeling project. But the example we like to provide is to people is just because you're doing, say, a remodel for a tenant space doesn't mean you have to put a $200,000-$300,000 elevator inside a building that currently isn't accessible. There's a percentage of money that needs to be spent on accessibility related accommodations. Often that is like accessible bathrooms, ramps. Sometimes we deal with lifts, but you're not required necessarily to bring a site completely up to ADA requirements. Older buildings, once again, just because they're difficult to work with and they weren't clean slates from the perspective of a design from a barrier-free nature, always present a more significant challenge. And my office is routinely approving disproportionality statements for folks that are providing that amount of money of their remodeling towards accessibility accommodations, but in turn not making the buildings fully accessible.
When you say amount of money, do you mean percentage of the total project cost?
It is that, and I don't know how much it is. I can't share it with you. I do sometimes look at the disproportionality statement, which is a statement from the supervising professional about the disproportionality of the value of a remodeling project to the amount of money going towards accessibility accommodations. It's a ratio.
All right, thank you.
Did you have any other questions? Okay, moving on then, Commissioner Mendez.
Thank you, Chair. Question, Kevin, the landmarks recommendation, is that a red or yellow light in kind of our speak in that?
Yes, I believe this would be considered a red light, considering the way those are often categorized. Just for the good of everyone watching here, Commissioner Mendez's question has to do with the Landmarks Commission recommendation, be it a yellow light. A red light is one where they find there's historic value and significance. It's their most concern recommendation, or at least their highest finding of historic value and significance. A yellow light is a caution. There may be some historic value with the site, but the building itself might not be historically significant. And green would be no known historic value. So I just wanted to point that out for the good of everyone listening.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. So they said it's a red light based on it being a contributing to the State Street historical potential, but then they mentioned that there's disinterest among the property owners. So would that kind of mean that it probably won't ever become registered, the State Street, as a historic district, because the owners haven't really shown that interest?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that there was a proposed national historic district that was proposed, and that was not approved. The city council made the choice to not create the historic district. So while it's referenced as being a potential district, that would require an action by the city council. And when it was before them several years ago, it was not approved. So there is not a historic district that's in place.
Kevin, just clarification on that. Did it actually go to council? I didn't think that it did. I thought that it never got that far.
This was, I believe, was before my time with the city. I'm not sure if the council act, but there was there was certainly, based on owner opposition, is my understanding, among the reasons why that didn't advance.
Thank you.
I would have to verify if it in fact received an up or down vote at the council. That I don't know offhand.
Yeah. Okay.
But my second different question is, this is asking for a 6-story building in the conditional use. Most of the downtown area in this section are all 2 to 3 story. So and the way he mentioned it, so by right, they can do 4, correct? And then apply for the conditional use for the additional 2 with a setback.
Yes, I'll clarify that the downtown height map in the zoning code that provides the regulations for bulk does, I think, as you had mentioned in the applicants, be a 4-story base, and you can have a step back 5th and 6th story. And based on the comments from city zoning, this would comply with that. I would note that this is not a bonus story situation. There are portions of the downtown where it's identified as a bonus story or using the bonus story standard. That is not this. In the DC downtown core zoning district, there's a general provision that applies to all properties that any building over 4 stories is a conditional use. It's more than 4 stories and 20,000 square feet. And so that's not specific to this site. It's not necessarily it's not a bonus story as we have seen on other projects. I would say the height is consistent with the adopted plans, and it's consistent with the zoning, with the setbacks and the step back. So that is the bulk condition that's recommended in those documents.
Right. Thank you.
Commissioner McCahill.
Thanks. I have a question. I'm not sure if staff knows the answer, but I'm curious, since these buildings aren't on the National Register of Historic Places or even a local district, are you familiar with a lot of grant type programs that they would be eligible for to help with the renovation and preservation?
I can't speak to all the different options. I know sometimes a National Historic District, part of the purpose of that is to provide funding options when that is created. I don't know what other options would be necessarily available in its current form.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Solheim.
Just following up on that, would it be fair to say, though, that the applicants could decide to pursue, if they were to preserve the building and seek resources for it, they could pursue an individual National Register historic listing to be eligible for tax credits?
I honestly could not speak to the likelihood or the eligibility of this building for such a program. It's possible, but I would defer to city's preservation planner and other colleagues on what programs might be available.
Okay, thank you.
Are there further questions for staff? any further questions for staff? Then I will be looking for a motion. Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. I will make a motion. Does Alder Bennett need to say something before I complete my motion, or?
No, go ahead and complete your motion, and then she can speak after that.
I will move on agenda item 6 that we place on file the consideration of the demolition permit to demolish 3 mixed-use buildings at 428 to 444 State Street.
Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Heck?
Please. I do appreciate that the applicants submitted the photos and a little bit more information than the previous iteration, but I still don't find it sufficient for approving a demolition permit. I really do think they needed to do a lot more in order to meet the standards. And in particular, the standard of approval that I feel they don't meet is the same as last time, number 7. And I will repeat that again if I can get to the right page that I need to be on in my browser. I would say number 7, the portion of that they're not meeting is that it's not consistent with the statement of purpose of the section and with the health, prosperity, safety, and welfare of the city of Madison. And in particular, section 28-185, which is the statement of purpose, the portion of that is, the purpose of this section is therefore to ensure the preservation of historic buildings, encourage applicants to strongly consider relocating rather than demolishing existing buildings, aid in the implementation of adopted city plans, maximize the reuse or recycling of materials resulting from a demolition, protect the public, etc. And I find the most important part of that is they are not aiding in the implementation of adopted city plans, because I find the demolitions are contrary to recommendation 75 in the downtown plan that reads, encourage the preservation, rehabilitation, and adaptive reuse of sound older buildings that contribute to the district's character. Now, I think they have shown some evidence that their buildings are struggling, but I think that if 5 or 6 years ago, I think it was, that they bought those, that they could have invested in a new roof and prevented a lot of the water damage that they're seeing. And they still could do that at not that great of an expense. And so I think that these historic buildings are worth saving. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Solheim, and then we'll hear from Alder Bennett. Commissioner Solheim?
Thank you. I echo Commissioner Heck. Thank you for those remarks and for your motion. I just wanted to add, the last time that we reviewed this, we talked not just about the historic nature of the individual buildings, but also their context. And I think particularly on this block of State Street, which is largely intact, many of the buildings dating back to the mid to late 1800s, more from the early 1900s, that's really a critical component of this. I agree the current condition of the buildings is not great, but really seems tied to the lack of ongoing maintenance. I also have general trepidations about using building condition as a standard, just due to perhaps unintentionally promoting neglect of our historic buildings. Part of buying a historic building is needing to regularly invest in it, and I have worked on a lot of buildings in much worse condition than this. I'm not going to say that it's easy, and I know it's a lot of investment on the owner's part, but that is part of purchasing a historic building. And lastly, I'll just add, there's a lot in our plans about redevelopment and increasing density, and rightfully so, because we need that. But there's also language like Commissioner Heck just talked about, talking about preservation. So it is a balance that's not easy to achieve. And I think it's something that we need to evaluate with every unique situation that we're looking at. And State Street is a special place. It can't, State Street in downtown cannot bear all of our growth. And that's why we're looking at incremental density throughout our city. And so I think this is one of those cases where that balance is really appropriate. And when I look at those buildings and I see that 1893 block at the top of the building, I think about how it has been such a part of the fabric of State Street for so long. And that's why I'm in support of this motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Solheim. We'll go to Alder Bennett and then Commissioner Mendez. Alder Bennett.
Thank you. I am quite disappointed with the motion and will strongly recommend, as the alder of this district and as someone that has toured these properties, that you vote no and instead move to pass forward the demolition permit of these buildings. And I come to that statement because the motion is quite ignorant of the current state of this building. And I think that it is important when looking at the demolition guidelines to understand to what Commissioner Heck said about recommendation 57. The key word there is sound. These buildings are not buildings are not sound. When I toured the properties with Colin, I entered them and immediately felt my foot squish under the ground. And it indeed was completely not level at any point. When I saw that staircase, I don't even know if you can call it a staircase. You can see the foundation of the buildings completely crumbling. And indeed, one can claim demolition by neglect, but I truly ask you what you want to have done with these buildings. I understand wanting to see them be repaired. Quite frankly, I don't understand why there were questions about how they can pay for that. I don't think that's the role of this commission. However, it's very clear upon view of these buildings that to repair them will require for them to be completely gutted and honestly demolish themselves. And at that point, it will not be the same building that some folks have come to love and admire. So furthermore, I don't believe that it is consistent with downtown plan recommendations to encourage the development of retail spaces. That is consistent with recommendation 72 to provide opportunities for development of retail spaces needed to accommodate new uses and expansion of successful businesses. Furthermore, I would point to how the commission voted on the Wisconsin Historic Museum just blocks away from the site, and which clearly demonstrates that this motion is inconsistent, and the Plan Commission's judgment here is quite inconsistent, and it almost appears as though it is deferent to what the building's uses are, but I will not go as far as to assume intentions. And that with seeing how the historic museum and the motion that was provided there and what is here today, it's very clear that if anything, this should have been passed and that shouldn't have. So I look to all of these things and am excited to continue to maintain the memory of Freedom Skate Shop being the first place that I bought my skateboard. And look forward to new uses and new memories for folks rather than retaining memories of things that are quite frankly falling apart and no one will be using because it's completely not in a state to be used, nor ever will be, until like one of the commissioners' question asks if they fall apart themselves. So it's really a question about if you want them to fall apart on their own or if you want to actually support a new use.
Thank you, Alder. The next registrant is Commissioner Mendez.
Thank you, Chair. I'll support this motion, mainly on the fact that the applicant was basing a portion of their request off the condition of the building, and approval standard 6 says that there should be a report provided by either the fire department, police tower, or building inspection division, and we didn't get that. If they would have provided that, that would have weighed a little bit heavier on the other way for me. So thank you.
Alder Figueroa Cole.
Kevin has his hand up. Is that okay if I pass to him first?
Yeah, sure. Kevin, did you have something you wanted to say?
I just wanted to quickly provide a clarification. There is not a requirement that there's a report from Madison Fire Department, police, or building inspection. It says the Plan Commission may consider, but it's not a requirement that something that the applicant didn't provide. So I just wanted to just note that as the standards read.
Okay, thank you. Alder Figueroa Cole, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I was kind of going to point to that. There's an or statement on that particular condition. So I don't want to be repetitive of what I had heard so far. Last time that this came to the Plan Commission, everything was presented, all the standards were addressed, and my biggest concern was where I was stuck was on that standard 6-7, the condition of the building. That was really my specific place where I couldn't reconcile the demolition. We discussed in detail about about efforts to relocate, and it was stated that wasn't a possibility. We discussed all of these conditions on the last one, and to me, the only sticky point was that condition of the building. I couldn't agree more about, when Commissioner Heck read the statement and that word sound, like it just stuck out to me because definitely the place does not look like a sound place. So I, without really going into discussing or even bringing up whatever use is this going to be, I just still like to understand how exactly the city of Madison benefits from this. How does the State Street benefit from a building that we cannot force to be maintained and eventually is going to be looking as abandoned and disastrous as the one that we discussed on the last meeting, where we had graffiti, we had broken windows, where when exactly is it? I mean, we're gonna just go on for another 30 years arguing with this owner until finally that we have no choice to move on and give life to a corner of State Street that could use a little bit of improvement and be compatible with the Peace Park that we have there. So I am definitely, I will vote in against this particular motion, but honestly, if the intent here was for the applicant to repeat everything that we discussed last time, that would be one thing. But for me personally, this one has stuck out of all the decisions that we have made so far. This one is one that I struggle with a lot, and it was because of the condition. So I appreciate that information was clear and presented today. And for all those reasons, I just can't see how a building that will continue. We cannot force these people to do anything with that building. So who benefits from that? How does State Street benefit from that? I don't see. I didn't see in a report if there was an option to save part of the building and reuse it. But if that is possible, we could use that as part of the conditional use to ensure that the numbers or the whatever parts of the building can be reused, but I really don't see a reason not to allow this demolition to happen. Thank you.
Next is Alder Bennett again.
Wondering if I can ask a question of Kevin. Thank you. So Kevin, I was wondering.
Wait. So you're asking Kevin Furco, right?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm wondering if, in reflection of what you saw with the approval of the Wisconsin Historic Museum, would you find that that denying a demolition permit here but approving one there is inconsistent and opens the city up to any issues with legalities?
That's a question that I don't. That would be one that I would want to research and look. There's different implications beyond legal and other things that are beyond planning, which is more or less where I'm at. So it's a question I could look at too, but it would be one that I would want to take back and speak with colleagues and report back to the Plan Commission.
Right. Based on your experience, do you think that could be an issue though?
As far as
it is an issue to have inconsistent motions, right?
I would say if there was something that, I would ask the commission as far as the motion they make to clarify any findings and anything that would be unique to this consideration. When Commissioner Heck made that, he cited standard 75. And if there were differentiating factors between this and any other request, certainly that could be made part of the record. But other than that, it's a really complicated question and one that I would want to report back to the Plan Commission on.
You know what? I'm seeing that Attorney Smith is here. Maybe she can answer that question. Sorry about that, Kevin.
Kate, do you wish to speak to that?
Honestly, good night, Ben. That's what I was going to say. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was signing on whilst also putting the kids to bed and have not engaged in this conversation. So like Kevin, I would need to think about this and come back to you. I apologize. I was lurking and waiting
Just
for the next thing.
Confirming having inconsistent motions with properties that are blocks away from each other can open up the Plan Commission and the City of Madison to legal difficulties, right?
I think that she said that she would want to research that, Alder Bennett.
Okay. No worries.
Commissioner.
I will just say that I think Alder Figueroa Cole said it perfectly. I truly do not know how the City of Madison benefits by keeping these buildings in disrepair. So I really hope you consider that. It's quite interesting where you're all standing.
Thank you. Commissioner Heck.
Hi, I'd just like to reiterate part of the record, I guess, that Commissioner Solheim mentioned is that State Street is a unique place and Capitol Square is a unique place and West Mifflin Street is a unique place. And I think that part of the job of Plan Commission, and it's not easy to do, is to make decisions on these standards of approval that do have some aspects of subjectivity in them. Each site is different, each application is different, and we can come to different conclusions. And in this situation, I think it's the fact that it's located where it is on State Street on a historic, not officially historic, street that is iconic and means a lot to a lot of people in Madison. You may disagree, and that's fine. I get that. I think it is kind of a close call, honestly, but I just wanted to add that for the record. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Heck. Commissioner McCahill.
Thank you. I find this decision really tough. I'm sort of still on the fence right now. I find Commissioner Heck's case that he just made, that, you know, correct. Like the context of this segment of State Street and the context of the architecture there warrants special consideration. I don't feel bad. I don't feel like there's anything we would be doing wrong by denying this demolition. The flip side to me is exactly what Alder Figueroa Cole said, is that I would hate to see this building just sit there and fall into more disrepair, and we can't predict the future, and that's what's hard about this. You know, the current owners are saying the solution from their perspective is to redevelop the property, and I've heard from other commissioners that this does feel like still a ripe opportunity for preservation and redevelopment, and we just can't say what that is. So that's where I am right now. I appreciate hearing everyone on the commission talk through their thoughts, and it's helping me sort of figure out where to go with this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Did you have anything further? No. Commissioner Spencer.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I was feeling the same way Commissioner McCahill does. You know, with the historic decisions, it is difficult, but I think for me, it really rests with the Landmark Commission reports, with them declaring this a landmark, and with their reports and where they weigh in on this site versus the other site that we saw, the arcade property. And with the location, I mean, regardless of proximity of the other site, you know, we look at it site specific. We don't look at it in relation to other sites. And we do have to take this into consideration, and we have to take the landmarks report into consideration as well. So that's why I think you know, it's frustrating. We can't make the property owner make it nice and spiffy. We can't force them to put tenants into the property. And we can't force them to sell it to a property owner that is going to make it, you know, nice and preserve it 100%, treat the building the way that it deserves. I think that's the most frustrating part about historic preservation here. But I think overall, I think I'm going to support the proposal, the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. I will not be supporting the motion. I think in reviewing and looking at the photos and understanding where we were with this last time, as Alder Figueroa Cole had stated, we were concerned with the condition of the property. And looking at the photos that were pre-submitted to us by the owner and applicant, is showing where this building is currently at condition-wise. And I think that with the fact that this building is probably now just going to sit there, and nothing is going to be put into this building, because it does not sound as though that the owner is wanting to revitalize these buildings, but actually put new property that could actually help the city grow in this area. It's just going to continue to deteriorate. And for me, I think that to have a property that can actually be revitalized is more important from my standpoint than trying to preserve buildings that now are going to basically be deteriorating because the owner is not going to do anything with them.
Thank you, Alder. Any further comments from the commission? Or any of the alders that I see are on this at the meeting? Seeing none, we will come to a vote. And since it's clear that we have differing opinions, I will ask Kevin to call the roll.
Okay, Commissioner Solheim.
Aye.
Commissioner McCahill.
No.
Commissioner Heck,
Aye.
Vice President Figueroa Cole,
No.
Alder Duncan,
No.
Commissioner Mendez,
Aye.
Commissioner Spencer,
Aye.
So I have 4 ayes and 3 noes. Chair, I believe because we have 8 members present, we need 5 votes to carry a motion. The chair can vote if it will impact the outcome of the vote.
Aye.
So I will clarify, we've got 5 ayes. If I could just ask for the good of the record, if somebody could use the raise hand feature, just make sure that I've got the 5 ayes. Oh, including Alder, Chair
Yeah.
Zellers.
Hold on, mine
Okay,
doesn't.
that's fine. I was just doing it to
Yeah,
just.
I actually can't raise my hand.
Okay, you are the chair. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
just doing it to make sure that I've got the
Okay.
count correct. So we've got, I believe then there's 5 votes for, 3 against, so that, Chair?
Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Moving on then to the next item on the agenda. Which is agenda item 13. And I believe, Chris, yes, Commissioner Solheim.
Do we need to take 7 and place on 5?
Oh, yes, good point. Sorry. Thank you very much. So we need a motion then also on, well, last time when it was voted down, that was, we did not take that up. Kevin?
Last time the conditional use was indefinitely referred.
Yes.
And so that I believe is a procedural option. If the Plan Commission were to deny that request, similar to it, just to confirm, the place on file was effectively a denial for the demolition request.
Right.
So if the Plan Commission would be voting to deny or place the conditional use on file, and ask findings be made, but I believe it also has the option to indefinitely refer that aspect of the request as well, as it did last time.
Okay, Commissioner Heck?
Thank you. I'll move that we place that item, I'm sorry, refer that item indefinitely.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Any discussion?
Yes, I'm choosing that option primarily to save time, so that we aren't making findings and won't need to go through the entire process.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Any other input or comments before we come to a vote? Seeing no raised hands, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Okay, now we are on agenda item 13. And I was the one who asked to have this removed from the consent agenda. And the reason why I did that was I did not feel that the standards of approval had been met. So we can hear from, I believe, is Chris Wells going to speak to it, or are you, Kevin? And afterwards, I can give more information at the appropriate time. Chris, if you could give a brief overview.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Plan Commission. The applicant and property owner are requesting approval to demolish a 2-story, 2-family residence and detached garage located at the northwestern corner of Aaron Street and South Brook Street. The application materials do not reference a future use of the property following demolition. One note that the letter of intent indicates that the building to be raised is a single-family residence. However, city records indicate that there are 2 units within the building, hence the reference on the agenda and in the staff report. The Planning Division recommends that the Plan Commission find that the standards are met and approve the demolition permit to allow the demolition of the 2-story residence at 1002 Aaron Street, subject to the input at this public hearing and conditions from reviewing agencies. With that, I'm happy to answer questions shortly after the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Are there any registrants wishing to speak? I don't see any on.
Yes, there are. We have 2 registrants available to speak. We have Dwayne Steinhauer and Todd Maas.
Okay, very
and we
good.
we have 1 speaker available to answer questions as well. Greg Doyle.
Okay, so you said Dwayne Steinhauer?
Yes.
And representing, in support and representing anybody?
In support, not represented. A representation isn't listed on the registration form.
Okay, maybe Dwayne can clarify that if he's representing the applicant. Dwayne, you have 3 minutes.
Dwayne, you are unmuted on our end. You should see a prompt to unmute yourself. It may be behind a window.
Perhaps we could go to the next registrant while Dwayne tries to work out the technical difficulties.
The next speaker would be Todd Maas of Woodwell Drive, Madison. He is registered in support and representing the property owner.
Okay. Todd, you have 3 minutes.
Primarily, I'm here for Greg Doyle. I had to sign off too, so I'll save you some time with that. I'm just here to answer questions and be in support of the project. We've been working through the approvals and we'll continue to do whatever the city would like us to do to work through those approvals. And otherwise, I'm just here for questions.
Thank you, Todd. Are there any other registrants, Kevin, wishing to speak?
Not wishing to speak, we have Greg Doyle registered, available to answer questions and in support, representing SSM Health.
Okay, thank you. Dwayne, have you been able to work out your microphone issues?
Yeah, again, Dwayne, you are unmuted on our end, but your microphone is still showing as muted within Zoom. There should be a prompt either underneath a window, or if you're using a different device, there should be a prompt to unmute yourself that you can click on to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm afraid that we're going to have to move on then. Are there questions of the 2 registrants that we are able to hear from, as opposed to Dwayne, who we can't? Are there questions of the registrants? I do have one question. It was noted in, I believe, the staff report that one building was moved several years ago when the demolition requests came up for like 13 buildings or something like that. Did you look at the cost of relocation with this building? It doesn't appear to be a super large place, and others of equal size have been moved. Did you look at the possibility of relocating it?
This is Todd again. Yeah, we definitely looked at, there's several steps that the city wanted us to do. And the very first one is the cost of relocation and repair. So before we considered that, we absolutely did. It's not a standard 4-square. It is a corner unit gabled. So the conditions for relocation, it's not the best candidate for that. And again, with a number of dangerous and hazardous building materials used from this time period, relocation requires a lot of remediation even prior to being able to remove it from city limits or take it anywhere. So that wasn't an option with this particular house.
Did you maybe touch base with building movers to find out about it, or any of the other entities who have moved similar size and similar aged buildings?
Yeah, actually, we're currently proposing to do one building on the east side of Madison that's of similar size if you take off the turret. So we do house jacking and house moving in conjunction with other subcontractors. So we were working with one at the time for an unrelated project that we did consult back in the summer prior to deciding to go through this process.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions that I have. Are there any other questions of our registrants before I close the public hearing? Seeing none, are there questions of staff? One question I have of staff is in terms of implementation of adopted city plans. That's one of the items in demolition. Statement of purpose, and we have talked about that for future use and aiding in implementation of plans. Does this demolition aid in the implementation of adopted city plans as opposed to ensuring the preservation of historic buildings? I mean, again, that's kind of a weighing. So does this aid in implementation of adopted city plans?
Well, as the Plan Commission weighs that information, just a few bits of information, largely what's in the staff report. In terms of the primary land use recommendation for the site, this is low residential, is the recommendation for the site. So it does have a residential designation. From a zoning standpoint, the property is zoned in the it is the TRC3 zoning, which is the surrounding zoning. So I think for the question in terms of the use itself, it's recommended for residential. It's zoned consistent with the plan. There isn't a redevelopment proposal that's specified here, either to add more residential or potentially to do something different. So I think it could be argued both ways. I think in one way, the site could be redeveloped with perhaps different residential uses that are allowed in the TRC3. So that would be one consideration, but it's not specified what the future use is, nor based on the changes in 2001 to the demolition ordinance, there isn't a future use that's part of the Plan Commission's approval here.
So it's currently residential, and it would have to be seeded afterwards, grass, until a proposal comes through? Is that
Correct. Correct. They would have to seed the site, close any driveways and curb cuts, but it would be a development ready site, and they could proceed with any of the permitted uses in the district or proceed other development opportunities, conditional uses, or other zoning changes or other items that might be a plan commission consideration down the road.
And
But at this point, just to be clear, it's not specified. There isn't anything specified about what would happen next.
Okay. And the Landmarks Commission said it's an 1897 Victorian area house with high historic integrity, but the building itself is not historically, architecturally, or culturally significant. So am I correct to say that that would be the yellow light?
That would be my interpretation, that this would be the caution recommendation, noting that there is some historic value, but the building itself is not historically significant.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have questions of staff? Then I would be looking for a motion. Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. I will move that the Plan Commission approve the demolition permit to demolish a two-family resident at 1002 Aaron Street.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. Commissioner Heck, did you wish to speak to your motion?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay. Any other observations, comments, input on the motion? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Next on our agenda is agenda item 17, Legistar 82116, located at 3722 Speedway Road, Alder District 5. Consideration of a conditional use in the neighborhood mixed use district for a mixed use building with more than 24 dwelling units, and consideration of a conditional use in the NMX district for a building taller than 3 stories or 40 feet in height to allow for the construction of a 4-story mixed use building containing approximately 760 square feet of commercial space and 31 dwelling units. And speaking to this, I believe is Kevin? Is that right? Or is it Chris?
It's me.
Sorry. Okay, Chris, you're up.
I will start it off and then hand it over to my colleagues. The conditional uses before you this evening are for a building in the NMX, the neighborhood mixed use district, for more than 24 units, in this case, for a building with 31 units, and for a building height exceeding 3 stories or 40 feet. In this instance, 4 stories, and the building is shown to be 46 feet 9 inches. Staff note that these 2 conditional use requests were reviewed and approved by the Plan Commission almost 2 years ago to the date, back on March 21st, 2002. And the proposed development is substantially the same. I believe the primary change is the Speedway Road facade was shifted back. I believe it was 5.5 feet from the property line in 2022. And now it's shown to be 12.9 feet. I believe that's to allow for some utility, underground utilities. The applicants can speak to that in detail. That said, staff believe that the conditional use standards can be found met and recommend that the Plan Commission approve the 2 conditional use requests before you this evening. And with that, I turn it over to Assistant City Attorney Kate Smith.
Hey,
Hi, everybody. Sorry that I wasn't paying attention to your earlier questions. All right, so let's, I'm going to talk about two things, and then hand it over to Matt Tucker when I'm done. So the first is it's based on the comments that were submitted ahead of time to Legistar. I'm assuming also heard during public comment, though I wasn't signed into the meeting at that point. That there had been some comments about the applicant choosing to opt in to the new requirements, meaning that zoning code change that took an effect a couple weeks ago now, maybe not even. And that there has been public comments that this is illegal or against our ordinance. And that's, first of all, simply not true. I don't want you to think that from in any way, shape, or form. There's a state statute that explicitly allows for this choice to be made by the applicant. And we, in fact, would be preempted if we tried to say that the applicant couldn't. We have no, we couldn't write an ordinance saying that an applicant couldn't opt in to standards that had, or requirements that had changed after they had filed their land use permit, or I'm sorry, land use application. And I mean, honestly, like, you know, I don't want to mischaracterize the, I'm sure, well-intentioned comments and public comments made, but this really simply isn't like a case of us trying to be like misleading or like hiding it through like basic legal trickery that this or state statute exists. The idea is just like so foundational to Wisconsin zoning law that like if you knew 5 things about Wisconsin zoning law, this would be one of them. And so the idea that we wouldn't have that we were trying to do some like secret legal maneuvering to hiding the rule, it just would have look, and it would have never occurred to me that public comment would try to bring this up, because it really is like that basic and universally understood. And so that being said, I understand how I'm assuming that this was either part of the public comment or you're aware of these complaints from the written public comment that we have in this ordinance, this language that they shall follow the rules as they were in place at the time of the application. And I mean, honestly, the reason being is because it is almost always the case that the people who file for land use applications, conditional use permits, anything in that genre, is that they worry that the law is going to change before it's being heard, right? And so people feel like that there's going to be this unfairness, that there's going to be a switcheroo in the regulations, and all of a sudden they're not going to be subject to the ones that came out. So using that type of language, frankly, like provides and helps people feel that there's not going to be a situation where we pull a fast one and change the ordinances, typically towards more restrictiveness, because that's almost always kind of the direction these things go at, and it allows for assurances for predictable outcomes, right? Like the applicants can rely that they believe that the fairness of the application, the laws that came in at the time of their application, can continue, can apply to them even if it's changed. And that's really this basic idea of fairness that also comes into play if they choose to flip it, which doesn't happen very often. It's not usually the case that people opt in to the new ordinances. But like I said, if they choose to, which they have here, we have it in writing, the very foundational understanding of Wisconsin zoning law is that they get to do that if they want to. It's not being tricky. Like, we're really not trying to pull a fast one. If that was the impression that anybody got from any of sort of the public comments. So then I just want to pivot a little bit to the lawsuit, aka the reason you get to hear the CUP permit again. So as you know, we're hearing this, or you are hearing this application for the project because the original CUP was vacated in circuit court. And so some of you might have read the opinion or read news articles about it. So I wanted to clear up some things. First of all, this is still an active litigation. This has not been resolved. There is not, so there's going to be somewhat of a limitation on what we can talk about because like I said, this case is still live. But before you, the same as a year and a half ago, is the conditional use permit asking for two things. First, an extra story, and second, extra dwelling units. And that's it. And I want to be really clear about that because for those of you who may have read the decision or read news articles about it, there was, I think, some kind of misleading conversations about what the actual CUP, both before and again, CUP version 2 that you see tonight was about. So in terms of what the CUP that was applied for a year and a half ago and was subsequently vacated by circuit court, like I said, two issues, extra story, extra dwelling units. So in terms of the extra dwelling units, the property isn't occupiable yet. So the dwelling units aren't really a live issue in terms of like the vacated CUP and what the circuit court order was. And then the second, which is more of a live issue, is but also you have to deal with the understanding that like the top floor has been built. And so while neighbors or other people involved might be frustrated that there hasn't been, that while the CUP has been vacated, there hasn't necessarily been what they might outwardly perceive as opposed to being part of like internal conversations with the applicant or any sort of like potential enforcement action, which I can't comment on, is that there is no world where when there's an extra floor of a building that is going to be like completely wrapped up in a bow 3 months after a CUP is vacated, right? Like you can't lop off the top story of the building. This is something that would have had to take time, regardless of what the vote outcome is today on the new CUP. That is going to be and going to continue to be an issue. And, I think this has happened before in the city. Like sometimes people build an extra story that they're not supposed to, and it takes time to work it out, right? That is not a thing that can get flipped and resolved quickly. So, so those, like I said, are the only two items that they're actually applying for with their conditional use permit. But what was confusing and I think frustrating for staff, for the applicant, for you all, for all people involved, is that what has never been part of the CUP application was parking. And that's misleading about the judge's decision. And the original application and this current application have always been presented to you with permitted parking locations in the zoning district and like relative to building form. And I'll let Matt talk about that in more detail. So that has not changed with the new zoning ordinance, with the new application, and also was true in the initial application. So while the new zoning code changes that they are opting into have provided what we hope to be some clarity about where parking can be located, it has not changed the fact that it was always permitted. It was permitted in the way that it was a year and a half ago. It's permitted today. And so but I think since the judge either didn't understand or focused on a lack of discussion on the below ground parking, which again wasn't discussed because it wasn't something they would have had to apply for with the CUP. And like I said, because it was always permitted, we are still taking that feedback, asking that you will all take that feedback and indulging us a little bit in that regard. And so I've instructed staff to spend some time discussing that and asking you all to have a record that does talk about the parking, because that was, for those of you that had read the decision, that was a lack of discussion about what was permitted, but the lack of discussion about where the parking was allowed to be located was the reason that the judge found the CUP to be vacated. I disagree with that, and I can't really comment further because, like I said, it is pending litigation. But I am going to turn over to Matt to discuss what the parking looks like on this site and kind of ask you all to spend some time with that as part of the record tonight, just as a direct response to the feedback that we got
Thank you,
from
Kate.
Judge Mitchell.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Kate. Next up is Matt Tucker. Matt.
Thanks. Okay. So yeah, as Kate mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about off-street parking and the zoning code in this specific project. So off-street parking facilities are provided for the use and convenience of occupants and users of property. The city's zoning code requires a certain amount of parking for certain uses. Requirements for parking can be found in section 28-141. Off-street parking comprises itself as surface parking first, potentially, which is often to the front, side, or rear of buildings, or as structured parking, which is part of the building itself, typically underneath, attached, or in some other shape or form part of the building. When parking is designed as surface parking, some of the zoning districts include specific placement rules for the surface parking. These rules are designed to result in certain desirable development forms, such as to minimize the aesthetic impact of parking on a building. They would relate to the site's orientation to the surrounding streets and public spaces, and potentially to neighboring property. These are district-specific zoning code requirements not relevant to the conditional or permitted use status of certain development. So on to this site. This site contains 24 parking spaces, this project. Of those spaces, 22 of those buildings are under building of a style we call parking structure, the zoning calls parking structure, parking spaces, and 2 spaces that are parking lot style spaces. These are surface spaces open to the sky. The underbuilding parking is part of the principal structure and must meet zoning requirements for the principal structure. Surface parking must meet design requirements for the NMX district, which is section 28.064. The parking has been reviewed by the Office of the Zoning Administrator and determined to be in compliance with MGO 28 requirements. I'll be available to answer questions after the public hearing. Thank you.
Okay, we do have some people registered on this item. First is Kevin Burrow, Greenway Boulevard, Middleton, in support and wishing to speak, representing Kenothi Bruce. Kevin, you have 3 minutes.
All right, good evening. This is Kevin Burrow again with Kenothi Bruce Architects. As was previously discussed, this is back before you basically for reapproval of the conditional uses and also clarification on the parking. Given that the building was approved 2 years ago and is substantially the same, I will not dwell on the design of the building per se, but can just go through some highlights. The site is shown on the screen before you here, located in between Speedway and Glenway Streets. If you go to the next slide, please. This is the updated site plan, which meets how the building has been constructed as far as placement of the building. From what was approved 2 years ago, the front facade has been pushed back over 5 feet, and that was for utility mitigation in order to preserve existing utilities along the front of the building, and that was processed and approved by the city accordingly. What has now been changed in this version that you see before you is the surface parking immediately to the northeast. That has been reconfigured such that the front edge of the parking is now behind or in line with the front plane of the building. So the overall site plan here is exactly the same. We got a 4-story facade on front, which steps down. The building does step on all sides to a smaller structure. If you go to the next slide, I put together an exhibit to clearly explain what was, by us opting into complying with the current zoning code that was recently approved, the original handicap stall would then technically be in non-compliance with its placement, as shown on the left. But on the right-hand side, you can see how we reconfigured the parking lot such that we moved the bike parking to be forward and pushed the surface parking back, so it is now in full compliance with the overall placement of the parking. Number of stalls are the same, and everything else has been unchanged. The following slides are just the renderings of the building, or floor plans and renderings. I can certainly go through that, but again, the building is not changed. It's currently under construction and is due to be finished up in the near future. So I will turn over the rest of my time and just be able to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. Then the next registrant is Alfred Matano, Ross Street, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. And could you remove, please? That, yeah, thank you. Al, you have 3 minutes.
Chair, there's no person in attendance by that name.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have, and my understanding is that there are 3 opponents wishing to pool their time. Henry Flogel, Alex Salutos, and is there a registrant named Pettit, Graham Pettit? Yes? No?
Yes, there is. Yes, there
Okay,
is.
that those 3 individuals want to pool their time for a total of 9 minutes. And I'm not sure if they have somebody who wants to start. I'll start with, it looks like Alex. Okay. Alex, your group has a total of 9 minutes.
All right. Could you give me a heads up when we get to maybe 7 minutes?
I'll have, okay. Kevin Furco said that he would, so that's very gracious of you, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Thanks, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to talk about the big picture to add some context. Yes, we have a housing crisis, and every neighborhood needs to do their fair share to create more housing and solve this crisis, including our neighborhood. Solving the housing crisis and being faithful to the letter and spirit of the zoning code, the comp plan, and our neighborhood plan are not mutually exclusive. We can and must do both. Building anything anywhere isn't a solution. And the housing crisis isn't holy water that blesses any project regardless of what it looks like, or allow the rules to be bent or broke. We count on you, the members of the Plan Commission, to hold developers accountable and make this happen. The best thing you can do to get a better project is sometimes you have to say no. Finally, based on how the neighborhood input was handled the first go around, the neighborhood is demotivated. There's a huge loss of trust in the process, which is sad. I'd like to speak quickly to a couple of the legal issues as a petitioner in this matter. The parking was not legal 2 years ago. That's not what the court said. In fact, the city didn't dispute our claim about the parking in their filings with the court. And a lack of discussion by the Plan Commission had nothing to do with the court's findings. Read the decision in order. Finally, I'm curious what the state ordinance is the city attorney refers to about the petitioner being able to opt out. I'd like to be able to read the actual language on that. I'd also like to share a little bit about the process just to give you some perspective. Contrary to the developer's claims, the C-store there was thriving and very profitable, heavily patronized by the neighborhood. Because of its size, it didn't meet Quick Trip's business model. The developer took a big risk and purchased the property without a contingency for city approval. A neighborhood meeting was called, and we saw the plans for the first time at the neighborhood meeting. It took time for people to digest it after seeing it for the first time, and a second neighborhood meeting was called because of concerns about it. At that meeting, the developer flat out told the neighborhood, "I'm not going to change a thing." Regarding the Alder's position, the public found out about her position in the paper before she even discussed it with the neighborhood. There was broad and very strong neighborhood support for a different project on this site that did include housing. All the neighborhood wanted was for the project to adhere to the goals and standards in the zoning code, comp plan, and neighborhood plan. More than 100 residents in the surrounding neighborhood signed a petition to this effect. which the city has. And 20 neighborhood residents testified at the public hearing on this project. After the testimony,
That's,
after the petition, the plan commission.
that's 7
ignored-
minutes, Kevin?
Is that 7?
It's actually, we're at 5. I chimed in at 7, but apparently that was not a visible cue. My apologies. I'll pause the clock here and let you regroup. We're at about 5 minutes right now.
Okay, all right, give me 7. The design raised significant concerns, especially regarding the engagement and lack of commercial space on the first floor and using it for a parking ramp exclusively for residents. Given the design, staff, the alder, the plan commission, and the city council was begged to refer this to the UDC. All the requests were denied. And then finally, the plan commission ignored the input of the neighborhood plan, and I can't tell you how demotivating that was and how insulting that was. I don't want to get into the weeds on the current proposal. I have no, I'm sure you're going to vote for this thing. In the end, we're in a bad place because of errors that were made previously. But I do want to point out one thing. The plan talks about, the staff report talks about the goals in the comp plan, and it paraphrases them. So you actually don't know what the goals are in the comp plan. And it doesn't state what the goal of the zoning district is in the zoning code. The primary goal is to serve the shopping needs of the neighborhood. Housing is a secondary or ancillary goal. In conclusion, it won't be a shock to the neighborhood if you approve this. It's been just a very frustrating and demoralizing process. It's unfortunate we're here. We could have done much better. So thank you. Hal or Graham, do you have anything to add?
Graham?
No, I think you said it all, Alex. It's just disappointing that this has gone this way, and no one in the neighborhood wants this building not to be finished at this point. I just hope the city is more deliberate and careful in the future. They approved the building permits when litigation was still occurring. I don't think that was a very wise decision. But otherwise, I think you hit everything on the head there, Alex. Thanks.
Thank you. And Henry, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. How much more time is there, Kevin?
Got about 2 minutes and 15 seconds.
Okay, Alex, you've got 2 minutes if you've got more that you wanted to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the parking. There are 7 commercial and mixed-use zoning districts, and they all have different parking requirements. As you go up in intensity, 4 of them allow for structured parking. 3 of them don't, including this one. And there's a reason for that. It was never envisioned to have a building that's 40,000 square feet in this zoning district. And the first floor, because of the goal, was always considered to be commercial use. And there was a reason that the code was written the way it was. And the city's response when they lost, when the judge said, no, this is not legal, to quickly make it legal is a huge slap in the face. There was no discussion of Well, why wouldn't you want a parking ramp on the first floor? And the ordinance was labeled underground parking, which is wrong. This legalizes parking ramps on the first floor in 3 zoning districts. There's no minimum requirement for commercial space in the building. You could have an ATM in the lobby and that would satisfy the code. It could be on the second floor. There's no requirement for commercial on the first floor in NMX zoning district. You discussed this 2 years ago when you were deliberating, saying, geez, we got to approve this even though there's only 700 square feet. Well, that was never corrected in the zoning code and life went on, which is a slap in the face. Now, when the court says in black and white, you're wrong, this is illegal, you change that, but you don't correct. There are many other districts that have requirements for the amount of commercial space on the first floor. And you just made parking ramps legal for the residents on the entire first floor of these buildings. I don't get it. Shame on you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next registrant is Linda Leonards, Patterson Street, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. Linda, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. The staff report says an applicant can voluntarily agree to be reviewed under the newer standards, but MGO 28.008 requires an application to be regulated by the terms and conditions of the ordinance and codes that were in effect at the time of filing. State statutes do permit an applicant and the city to agree to use the newer ordinance, but city agreement is required. The developer cannot unilaterally opt into the newer ordinance. So the question is whether the city has the right to agree to an applicant's request to opt into a newer ordinance. MGO 20.008 does not permit the city to agree to use the newer ordinance. It clearly says the review, quote, shall, unquote, be under the ordinance as existing at the time of application. This does not create a conflict with state law. Madison has merely exercised its right to say that it's never going to agree to use the newer ordinance. Rather than negotiating on a case-by-case basis, the city chose to have a bright line rule that the ordinances in effect at the time of application apply. Wisconsin statutes do not prohibit this approach. The relevant state statute went into effect on December 13th, 2013. Madison has had 10 years to modify its ordinance in a way which would allow the city and the applicant to jointly agree to use the newer ordinance. It has not done so. Shortly earlier in this meeting, 10, 15 minutes ago, I emailed you the state statute so the commission can read the language for itself. And it clearly does say it's a joint decision and there's no requirement for the city to do it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Kevin, are there any further registrants?
I'm going to refresh the list one more time. And at this time, the only other registrant that I'm seeing is the applicant Brandon Cook, who's registered in support and available to answer questions.
Perfect. Okay, very good. Are there questions of any of our registrants? Seeing no raised hands, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. This is for Assistant City Attorney Smith, who hopefully is still with us. Yes, awesome. we just heard that, you know, the opinion that, you know, the city could allow people to opt in, but we have what was called a red line in our statute that said we are not allowing ourselves to or applicants to take advantage of that state statute. It was called a red line. What do you think of that interpretation?
I think it is not a red line. I think that the interpretation of the public commenter comes with an agenda that is not my legal advice. I would it is my opinion that the state law allows this. The city has allows like the opt-in. We can't it preempts our ordinance. And if our office often has openings, so we welcome anyone who would like to apply to be an assistant city attorney who would like to take on the state in this regard. I think there's probably bigger fish to fry, but I am your legal counsel, and if you choose to instead take it from a public commenter, there may be some repercussions.
Thanks. And did you say that that applicants had taken advantage of this option before that you were aware of?
Yeah, Matt could probably speak to it. This doesn't happen very often, right? Like usually people don't want to, but this isn't new.
Matt, do you have anything to add?
Just a few times in the past, we've had a similar type of a situation occur where there may have been an ordinance amendment, and the things I'm thinking of, and Kevin might recall, there might have been a use that was added or something along those lines, that there was a staggering of the ordinance being adopted, and then the party requesting to use that ordinance for their project that was coming to approval right behind it, basically a meeting or two cycle behind.
It actually sounds familiar to me, but I can't think of a circumstance.
I can't either, but there's been at least three I'm thinking of, but I can't remember which ones.
All right, thank you. That was my question.
Are there further questions? I'm seeing no raised hands, so I will ask for a motion. Commissioner Solheim.
I move that the Plan Commission find that the standards for conditional use have been met, including standards 5, 7, and 12, and approve the request to construct a mixed-use building with over 24 units and for a building in the NMX district exceeding 3 stories or 40 feet in height, all to allow for the approval of a 4-story mixed-use building with approximately 760 square feet of commercial space and 31 dwelling units, subject to the conditions in the staff report.
Seconded by Alder Figueroa Cole. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Solheim?
Yes, I will expand on that a bit. As noted in the motion, I do believe that all of the standards for the conditional use have been met. Specifically, I'll call out 5, 7, and 12. So related to standard 5, the parking reduction noted is within the range that can be approved administratively by staff. And I do believe it is appropriate given the transportation linkages at the site. Related to standard 7, the revised and clarified ordinance was approved earlier this month to clarify the location of the parking. The applicant has confirmed in writing, which is in Legistar, that they wish to be reviewed under the recent ordinance and opt in, and that decision is allowed per state statute as described by Attorney Smith. The covered parking meets the zoning requirements, and in regards to the surface parking, this has been addressed with the revised site plan, which is still a condition in the staff report, so it can be confirmed during the site plan review process. So given those items, this current plan complies with the zoning code requirements for off-street parking. And then lastly, related to standard 12, the height of the building is 4 stories versus the 3 stories associated with this district, hence the conditional use. And as part of the conditional use, we always consider recommendations in adopted plans. The comp plan calls for 2 to 4 stories and up to 70 dwelling units per acre in this area. This proposal falls within those parameters. The 4-story is also set back, and the footprint is much smaller than the lower floors. And while the older neighborhood plan does call for 3 stories, it also called for a mixed-use building with residential and commercial, which this proposal is consistent with. So after considering the topography of the site, reviewing the shadow study, and reviewing the diagrams that confirm that this complies with the transition requirements, I believe this standard has been met.
Thank you, Commissioner Solheim. I'm going to turn to Kevin. Is the motion clear and the reasons for the motion clear?
Yes, it's clear to me.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Okay, is there any business by members that any members want to raise? Seeing no raised hands, we'll move on to the secretary's report. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few items here. Just note, these are on your agenda here. As far as recent council actions, the CSM that the Plan Commission saw at their previous meeting for Arlington Place, that one was not approved in terms of having 14 votes needed to pass that one. As far as the other items, they were approved as noted on your agenda. As far as upcoming matters on the April 5th meeting, just to highlight a couple of items, you have some code changes related to drive-throughs, accessory dwelling units. As far as development requests, there are requests up on the north side of Sherman Avenue for a new golf center with a rezoning and a conditional use for outdoor recreation. And looking ahead then to the May 6th meeting, a handful of items on the agenda. Right now scheduled is the redevelopment of the Essen House block in Wilson and Blair Street. That's moving its way through its bodies. We'll see it before you. There is also, I believe that is, that's what we have. If there are other questions, let me know. I do want to note, and I see a hand raised from Leslie Taylor, who is registered on an early other item. So Chair, if I could just provide a quick clarification as I'm seeing a hand up. For Leslie Taylor, for the good of the record, that item was referred. No action was taken. It was referred to the next meeting. You were, I believe, registered to speak on the Hurling plat out on Mineral Point Road, and that was referred to the April 8th Plan Commission meeting. I just want to note that because I see your hand is raised, and I don't have an email, I believe, to correspond with that. So that is what I have for this evening's Secretary's report.
Okay, very good. And I just did want to emphasize, Kevin said this, but it is incorrectly stated in the agenda in regard to recent Common Council action. So just to emphasize that that was not approved by the Common Council, despite what it says on that written document. Any questions of Kevin? Okay, then I will be looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Mendez, seconded by Commissioner Solheim, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, we are adjourned. And I will see you on April 8th. Thank you, everybody. This was kind of a difficult one.